Welcome to Courageous Conversation with Teresa W. Gamble, a cultural storytelling, gracious space to bridge generational gaps through active listening and action-oriented changes.
Greetings and welcome, everyone. This is your host, Teresa W. Gamble of Courageous Conversations. We'll welcome you in for the new year. I know a lot of you have your resolutions and all those things that you want to accomplish and change from last year. But right now, the most important thing that's pivotal for Courageous Conversation kicking off this year is our voting rights, because we won't be able to accomplish our dreams and our goals if we do not protect our voice and our vote. So today I have the pleasure and the honor to be able to meet and interview and have a candid conversation with Mr. Phillip Minor, the committed and dedicated Democrat. I loved it when he sent me his title, the committed, dedicated Democrat. He is by way from Minnesota, but he is Jacksonville, Florida is his home since 2008. So we are so super excited to have Mr. Phillip here. So Mr. Phillip, tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, where you went to school, your work history, your community engagement.
All right. Well, first, let me just say thank you to you for even extending the invitation to me as one of the many people who are committed as a volunteer and community advocate to the For Our Future effort. They really are a wonderful nonprofit structure that really works hard to try and educate, inform, inspire, and then engage our community citizens, especially those folk from communities that have been left out or disregarded or even dissed and disenfranchised. So I'm absolutely appreciative to people like Valerie Finley Green, who asked me to be a part of this along with you. So I'm just glad to be with you and all of your listeners and viewers. But I hail from California, the San Francisco Bay Area, Menlo Park specifically. We used to laugh when folks would say, "Where are you from?" I'd say Menlo Park. "Oh, that's the home of Shirley Temple Black, Willie Mays, and Stanford University." And I'd say, and don't forget Sunset Magazine, which used to be a big thing. But anyway, that is where I'm from, the San Francisco Bay Area. But Teresa, I graduated from high school there and then went on to college, a small university in Forest Grove, Oregon, right outside of Portland, about 30 miles west. Predominantly white school, had never heard of it before. A scholarship organization in New York picked up my PSAT scores, and among the West Coast schools that it recommended was Pacific. As a matter of fact, it was the only school outside the state of California that they recommended. And my mother, her point was, "You ain't leaving the West Coast, boy." So if I didn't want to go to school in California, I felt the only other option I had was this place called Pacific. So anyway, I went, it was great. 4 years later, I graduated, moved to the Tacoma, Washington area to work at a university, Pacific Lutheran University. I was there for 13 years, started as an admission counselor and left there as the Associate Dean of Admissions and Financial Aid, and was their Director of School Relations. Simply meant I was their outside face to a lot of educational oriented organizations regionally and nationally. Then moved on to Honeywell for about 3 years, also in the Northwest. And then from there, moved to Minnesota and then spent 20 plus years there in higher education and finished up my career actually working for 17 private colleges in the state of Minnesota, the Minnesota Private Colleges Fund and Research Foundation. Loved every moment of it. My job was simply, how do we increase the numbers of non-white students in the classes? How do we increase the diversity among our faculty and staff? And then the third leg of my stool was, how do we increase the diversity of our donors? Because many organizations forget that Black people and other folks of color, we have money. And I used to tease my colleagues at work and I'd say, Oprah Winfrey is not sitting around waiting for us to write her a letter to ask her to give to Hamlin University or any one of our 17 schools. So the point was, if you're serious about diversity, let's really work that issue. And I was glad to be the first director of what was called the Community Initiative to help those 17 private universities in their quest to be a much more reflective and diverse community of learners, students, faculty, staff, and where we spent our procurement dollars, because that's also important. So it's always been education. And so that's just a little bit about me and where I'm from. My work history, again, Honeywell was a part of that. I managed EEO and affirmative action. I managed my division's community affairs. So I got our people involved in volunteer efforts all around the Puget Sound in the greater Seattle area. And then lastly, I had the honor of, managing our contribution dollars. So I got to give away some of Honeywell's money. And you can rest assured that, again, diversity was always at front and center for me. And so many different minority-oriented thrusts were supported, not only in the volunteer efforts, but where our volunteers went, I felt that's where our dollars should follow. So, and then again, back to higher ed when I moved to Minnesota, retired from there, and now I'm enjoying the Sunshine State and not working, but my volunteerism is, as you've intimated, it's civic engagement, it's voting, voter education, voter responsibility, general advocacy of policies and all. And so I'm loving it. And Jacksonville has been a good place for me. Challenging, but a good place if one is a dedicated and committed Democrat.
Wow, I totally see why Miss Valerie wanted me to interview you. You have a very illustrious, interesting background. I was reading your bio and I was like, I had to read it 3-4 times. I'm like, oh my God. Not because I didn't get it, but it was just the amazing work that you have done. And I just saw from your resume how such of a pioneer you are and what you have done in education, and want to make sure it's more diversity in the classroom, more diversity, in donorship, more diversity,
Absolutely.
As faculty, as staff. And
Yes.
I think that's amazing for the initiative that you're doing and all the other organizations that you're a part of that I was researching before this interview. You have done a lot. I thought I'd done a lot, but I think I met my match today, everybody.
Well, to be fair to you, I probably have you by quite a few years because I'm 71 and there's no way that you're anywhere close to that. So just keep going to bed and waking up and you'll get here.
Yes, you do have me back up the years. You sure do. So I know you mentioned earlier, you said that Jacksonville was good to you, but it was challenging. So what made you move to Jacksonville out of all the choices you could have went with your expertise?
Well, and my partner, spouse, and I, we did look across the country, but we were looking for a number of things specifically. One, I wanted out of Minnesota, as did my partner, spouse. And we wanted on the water. So we thought either West Coast or East Coast. We really didn't want to consider, say, that Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, in terms of that Gulf area. But the two coasts we were open to. So we wanted water. We wanted warm, or at least not snow cold. How about that?
Right.
But then also for us, it was important that we be in a place where the arts were alive and appreciated. No place is like New York when it comes to the arts, but there's plenty of good things in a lot of other cities. We were also interested in making sure that educational opportunities were here. And I think Jacksonville is rich in that with, a wonderful historical Black college here, one of the oldest four-year institutions in the state, regardless to race or ethnicity. But then the Florida State College system here, Jacksonville University, University of North Florida, and then a number of proprietary schools. So the education piece was important. As importantly for us was the fact that we needed there to be a significant, not just minority, but Black population. Because I grew up again in that San Francisco Bay Area, and I'm the youngest of three, and my brothers and I were always one of few Blacks in all of our schools. We were just ahead of the greater numbers of influx of African Americans and then later Latinos and the like moving into Menlo Park. So and then the same in college and all of that. I didn't want that in my retirement years. So we needed to have a critical mass of African Americans. And Jacksonville had that 30 plus at the time that we looked. We bought back in 2003, didn't move here, as you mentioned, until 2008 full time when I retired. But at the time we looked, Nat Glover was the sheriff. Ray Alford was the fire chief, two Black individuals. You had your four folk on the city council. Now, I forgot that there were 19 city council seats, but I was just glad to see that there were 4 Blacks on it, So I was excited. And I looked at the total number of registered voters, and Democrats outnumbered Republicans, and Black Democrats was the significant voting bloc in that, second only to Democratic women. And so everything was wonderful. So Jacksonville was big that way. But we did look out in the Northern California area. We looked back in the Seattle area where I was for so many years. And we did look at Atlanta for a hot minute, but it was too hot for us. And then we settled on Charleston, Savannah, and Jacksonville. And long story short, after visiting each a couple of times, Jacksonville simply won out, mainly because all of those things that we mentioned were important. And I had a colleague who worked for the YMCA of the greater North Florida YMCA Association here on Florida's First Coast, Pop Alexander. He was staff. I was a volunteer with the National YMCA Black Achievers Program for 20 years.
Wow.
And Pop was a great person to have on your team when you're trying to figure out if a local community can be good to you, for you, and hopefully afford you some growth. And so it won out. And if I had to say one other thing, the last time we came visiting down in this corner of the world, we went to the Ritz Theatre and Museum. We got there on a Sunday. It was after 2 o'clock. The damn place was already closed, but the doggone assistant curator, she opened the door as if we were her first visitors of the day. We didn't even know that they were closed until we left. And I looked back on the door and I said, oh my God, Adonica Toller was the assistant curator there. She's now the administrator, museum administrator. But she treated us as if we were her first customers of the day, as opposed to two individuals who had the audacity to ring the doorbell after they had closed. And I told her then, it was in July, I said, if we choose Jacksonville, I will be back to volunteer. And that November, I was back over there, volunteered, went through the docent training, and I didn't leave there until my mother got ill in the early part of 2018. Well, she had cancer, but it started getting a little more challenging early part of 2018. And I had to stop my volunteer work with the Ritz, but that's the only reason. Wow. So that jewel in this community made the difference for us to say yes to Jacksonville over Savannah, Georgia, and or Charleston, South Carolina.
That is amazing. Yes, Adonica, that is my lady. Me and her went to high school together.
Oh, okay. All right.
And
she's a wonderful person.
She does the Culture Life series on my show. We talk about history,
right. You
the arts. Yes.
All right.
That is good. I like the way you took your time and researched where you and your spouse wanted to relocate to. And I think it's very important to make sure wherever you move to is a good fit for you and the things that you love. And I like how you were talking about how you and your brothers were the only brown students in the classroom. Now, when I was growing up in Jacksonville, we were bused to predominantly white schools. So I know that feeling when you're the only brown person in the classroom and nobody in the classroom looked like you, including the teacher. So I can relate to that. But as years progress and things start changing, then you will see more of that diversity. But I took it upon myself to attend the HBCU you're talking about, the Edward Waters College. I'm an alumni because I wanted that experience to go to school with other students and faculty and staff that look like me.
Come on. And the expectation is that you are going to do well. The only question is, how well are you going to do? Not, can she do it? Or, oh, maybe we can take a chance, and all that kind of crap. The expectation at our historically Black colleges is that you will be excellent, not whether or not you can. The issue isn't whether you can. The issue is how high will you achieve? And that's a very different approach to education and personal development that I think is uniquely a part of historically Black colleges and other minority serving institutions. And I feel similarly about single sex colleges and universities, both for men and women, but particularly for women. And I hang my hat on thinking women ought to give strong consideration to that female dominated and supportive and in most instances nurturing environment that simply suggests that, oh, yes, you can, not might I be able to. It's no, oh, no. Oh, yes, you can. Okay, around the world and back snap. Okay, you see what I'm saying?
I love it.
Right.
I love it so much. So as I read your bio and you talked about your community engagement, you keep talking about volunteerism. And I used to, as an educator in the classroom, I used to tell my students how important volunteerism is for twofold reasons. One, to learn about your community and build relationships, and two, to build skill sets and
Yes.
and training that you not typically will get on a 9-to-5 that you're getting paid for. So how, with all of that and what you brought to Jacksonville, was Jacksonville a good choice for you? If so,
Yes.
why? If not, why not?
Well, it really has been overall. Yes, some challenges, but absolutely, it has been a good choice. I have been afforded many opportunities to use my skills, my interests, my passions, and add them to other folk who are similarly focused, if you will, or driven. And hopefully there have been some positive results from that. So Jacksonville has been a good place for me in that vein. The challenge with Jacksonville has been squarely in that the civic engagement area, to have a numerical advantage in terms of registered Democrats and to have so many who are African American, 144 plus thousand registered Black Democrats out of the 265,000 total registered Democrats. I've never lived anywhere where the numbers have been this rich, but I've never been anywhere where the Democrats have been so uneven in turning out to vote to make sure that their voice is heard. So if they're consistent, it has been a low voter turnout on the part of Democrats in general for a whole plethora of reasons, and I'm sure we'll get into those. But that has been my greatest disappointment / challenge. But that is what has led me to say I really had to kind of step back from the arts because of my mother, but I didn't go back to them as fully because of the work that is necessary with regard to the civic engagement in general, voting and voting advocacy in particular. That's too important for me to do anything other than give my full attention to it. So to back to that question, has Jacksonville been good to me? Absolutely. Is it a challenge? Without a doubt. But it is a challenge that we must rise to. And I have the audacity as a Black man to say it. I believe we're going to beat the odds, but I'm going to work it until I drop. Okay.
Oh my goodness. That's the old school, what they say, OG talk that I'm used to listening to and hearing. But you have a lot of people, they don't have that tenacity and drive no more. They have become complacent. They have become lazy. I've heard, you got to be careful how you pick and choose your battles. My mantra is, if the battle didn't come to you, if the battle came to you, then it's meant for you to fight it. If our ancestors had to do it, why you can't? So
exactly. I mean, the poll taxes, the so-called poll test that we had to suffer through, the basic indignities, the water hoses, the dogs. I mean, all of those things just to be able to cast a vote, and more often than not even be able to sign your name, but to do your mark with an X. And so when I think of all that has been done to give us this opportunity, I dare say this right and responsibility, then I look at it this way: how dare us not do that? How dare us not do that? My mother and father each grew up in segregated communities in the great state of Texas. Moved to California, of course, in the early 1940s and all, but they remember the challenges for them. And one of the things they both did, they never missed an election. And my father was barely literate. He didn't finish the 6th grade, but he could read and write enough to read a ballot, to fill it out. And of course, he had registered to vote, don't get me wrong. But the point is, that was big doings for them. Big doings, and they never missed it. They expected their sons to follow suit, and we did.
Wow. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a commercial break right here, and we're going to dive into Mr. Phillip Minor take on community and civic engagement. You got a little bit of it so far. We're going to talk about the voter profile in Duval County, and we're going to talk about this redistricting that is coming up that's very essential. If you haven't been watching and paying to the national news, the local news is talking about it a little bit, but the national news is shedding more light. We're going to give you some insight on how you can get involved. Even though you're socially distancing and not coming in the public, there are ways you can get involved. So stay tuned and we'll be right back. Facebook Elevate is a community and learning platform created to accelerate the growth of minority-owned entities. Concierge Resource Professional Consultant is partnered with them to support and invest in Black learners through the disbursement of scholarships for the Facebook Social Media Marketing Professional Certificate,
program, which teaches foundational advertising concepts across platforms, providing the tools to help build a successful digital marketing career. To learn more, follow Concierge Resource Professional Consultants on Facebook to direct message for an invitation to sign up.
All right, everyone, ladies and gentlemen, that is our commercial break. We still having this candid conversation with Mr. Phillip Minor, the committed, dedicated Democrat. I'm telling you, he is giving us some insights on his why for coming to Jacksonville and how he has taken his retirement, not to sit down and enjoy our beautiful sun in Florida, but Mr. Minor has been busy volunteering in the arts, but he had enough wisdom to know he didn't want to give it up, but it was something greater he was called to do in our community. And for me personally, I'm thankful for it. And that is that civic engagement. So now we're going to get into this segment of the interview with Mr. Minor, talking about community and civic engagement. So let's talk a little bit more, Mr. Minor, about this community engagement, why it's important to you. And I know you talked about the arts and culture earlier. I'm an arts and culture girl yourself, as you can see. Mm-hmm. I love it with music and paintings. And then the general volunteerism, you know, why would a person, especially a retired person, stay engaged in volunteerism after you don't work so long?
Well, for me, I really resonate with the words of Marian Wright Edelman when she suggested, and I'm paraphrasing here, that service is the rent you pay for the space you occupy on Earth. And I agree with that. But I also agree that one of the great philosophers, I can never remember whether it was Plato or Socrates, but he did suggest that a life lived unexamined is not worth living for a man. And so you must always seek to examine what's going on around you. But it's not enough just to examine it, because you'll find some things that might not be quite right as you see it. And if they aren't, then it is incumbent upon you to then put your shoulder to the wheel to try to turn that around and to bring them forward or to move them toward being right, correct, good, and just. And so again, service is just a piece of it for me, and always has been from my early years in high school. That's just how it was. And I mentioned my time with other volunteer places here, the Ritz, but I also spent 20 years in volunteer service with the YMCA of the USA. I may have mentioned, I can't recall, but I was the chair of the National Steering Committee for the Black and Hispanic Achievers Program for that national structure, and loved it. But as you suggested, I had to move away from those because of the weight of importance or the gravity of the need for Jacksonville, our wonderful area here in Northeast Florida, to really be more, in my view, more successful with regard to our public policy and political priorities and I dare say even our principles and values. And for me, that's democratic. That's the Democratic Party. I'm not speaking against any other party. I'm simply speaking for how right the Democratic Party is for me. I think it is indeed the big tent. I think that we have plenty of room for everyone. I think we allow, maybe to a fault, disagreement within it, because sometimes folks, if they don't get their way, they'll take their ball and go home. Where folks on the other side, on the Republican side, if they're not happy, they're not necessarily disgruntled with their party. They may be disgruntled with the candidate, but not their party. But it is important for me that civic engagement be defined somewhat narrowly with regard to all there is to do about, around, and with voting, whether it's registration, voter education. What's the difference between vote by mail and going to early vote or on election day? Do you understand the need for being a poll worker, which is a paid job that you can do, or the importance of that other role, the poll watcher? I poll watch. I certainly, who wants to pass up money, I suppose, but I much prefer to be the poll watcher to make sure that the workers are adhering to what they must in terms of making sure our elections are accessible, that there is no intimidation going on, however accidental. So that civic engagement piece is important. And when, again, I go back to the numbers of registered Democrats, and specifically African Americans, if the question is voting important to communities of color? Absolutely yes. Most specifically for African Americans, if for no other reason. We are the largest non-white population here. So it stands to reason to this voter that our voice, our concerns, our interests, our priorities, our preferences ought be seen or reflected in our candidates, who I hope we would ultimately help win, because I think we have the better set of policies. And guess what? You cannot govern if you don't win. And so back to an earlier point I made, the disappointment in Jacksonville is the sporadic, inconsistent turnout of Democratic voters, and that includes African Americans. We have the ability to win in this county. 19 city council seats. We only have at this point 5 that are Democrats, District 1, and then 7, 8, 9, and 10. Tommy Hazori, who just passed, was an at-large city council person in Group 3. So we had 6. He's gone. We're down to 5. Well, 19 minus 5, that's 14 Republicans. They're running stuff. You only need 10. They have 4 extras. So we can pick up 4 Republicans and still not have enough to sway a decision, you see. But that civic engagement is important, and for all of us. Why? There's not many, if any, things that go on in our lives that don't ultimately get back to an elected official. If you're in business, somebody's setting policies and practices in terms of what the rules are for where business can be cited, how much insurance they ought to pay, what's the value on them, what kind of lending policies ought to happen with regard to bonding, so many things. Whether you're looking at sports, often enough, it's an elected official that's going to decide that they're going to give Shad Khan any kind of money to help him do X, Y, and Z at the stadium, in spite of the money that he has. But the point is, very little in our life is not connected to the vote. So if we as people of color, Blacks in particular, are concerned about things not working well for us, I simply suggest it has a lot to do with whether we show up at the polls and vote accordingly for candidates that we believe have our best interests at heart. Understanding that if they don't, then we can give them their pink slip 4 years later if they're on the city council, or 2 years later if they happen to be a U.S. congressperson. You see what I'm saying? But we must take advantage of that civic engagement so that we will, pardon my French, run stuff here, because we can do it, particularly again with those numbers. Teresa, since I moved here full time, when I look at the at-large races in city council, in all of the years since I've lived here, 2008, not a single at-large city council person won their election with more votes than the total number of registered Black Democrats in Duval County. Wow. Said another way, if the Black registered Democrats in Duval County would have voted for a single Democratic candidate in each of the 5 at-large races, in every race since I moved here in 2008, that person that the registered Black Democrats would have voted for would have won. Because none of them have gotten more than like about 103, 104,000 votes. And even in those years, in those races, when that 103,000 won the election for those at-large city council persons, Black registered voters in those years totaled 126,000.
That's amazing.
So we had 20,000+ more registered Black Democratic voters than the total number of votes that those successful city council persons running at large received. So again, your viewers need to understand, if Black Democrats just turned out at that 85, 90% level and voted for a single candidate, at least in the at-large races, and all of the city officers, the mayor, the sheriff, supervisor of election, all of that, we would win.
Wow.
I think we might need to take a break because I have a doorbell ringing at my home. Can we do that?
Of course.
Fantastic.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to press pause and we'll be right back.
Thank you.
See. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are back. Mr. Minor was educating us and giving us the data and the breakdown of the power of the African-American vote, or the people of color vote, in Jacksonville, Florida, Duval County. And this is something I have always pushed as well, Mr. Minor, even before I had to show how important we need to go vote, how we need to make sure our children are aware and educated the importance of voting. I tell people, yes, it's good to get opinions on others on who to vote for, but I always say you need to do your due diligence if that person is the person you want representing your community. So, Mr. Phillip, continue to tell us about you told me why it's important and how, with the data, how African Americans or people of color can dominate some of these elected offices in our community, and how important that we need at least 10 Democrats on our local city government in order for us to make change, or in your words, in order to govern.
Yes.
So in order to do that, where would a person begin who is retired, who has been laid off from COVID, who has become full-time caregivers, and they cannot physically get involved in the trenches?
Well, I think it does start with being sure that one registers to vote. And I must admit, I am absolutely pleased that there is such a large number of Democrats in general, but African-American Democrats in Duval County who are registered, because if you're not registered, obviously you cannot vote. So that's step one, is to do that. Step two for me would be then to simply commit yourself to saying, I am going to learn a little bit about candidates, and most importantly, I am going to go and vote, and then I'm going to vote the entire ballot. So let's deal with, how does one really go about learning more about candidates? Well, the Supervisor of Elections website is one possibility at www.duval.elections.com. And you can look under general elections, and there will be an option for filed candidates, the individuals who have already said they want to run later this calendar year, as well as in 2023, when our entire city council turns over. Well, they're all up for re-election. Some of them are turned out, others are not. But the point is that 2023 elections will be very important for us. But read about them. And then if there's not a lot necessarily on that site about the candidates, but then just Google them. Go to their campaign pages. Most of them will have a Facebook page. Start looking at these people to see whether or not they meet your expectations. You can do that. You can even ask questions of them through their various websites and all, but educate yourself on them. Also consider affiliating with the local county party. That's another way to get information. And a lot of folks are disappointed in the party. They never filled enough candidates. And my gosh, I never hear that much from them. There's always those kinds of comments. But for me, it's a matter of seek us out and get the information, because it is readily available. That was one of my first stops, was to join the local Democratic Party, and I've not looked back. I'm a precinct committee person, so I work my precinct. As a matter of fact, Teresa, here in District 1 where I live, our district chair and myself, we have written a little postcard or a letter. We changed it up over the course of the 12 months of last year, but we wrote to every single one of the newly registered Democrats in District 1 as of January 25th of last year.
Wow.
Although we have the last 87 haven't gone out yet. I just picked up the labels last week from the Supervisor of Election Office. But we have written to all of them simply saying, glad you registered as a Democrat, gave them a little bit of background information on the numbers and how we can win, introduced them to our local party, and then said, but we'd like you to get involved locally too in District 1 through your precincts. And here's our district chair's name and phone number and email. And also another engaged person in the district is Phillip Minor, and I gave my name and number. And so there will be, let's see, it was 900, it'll be a little over 1,000 plus newly registered Democrats in District 1 alone. Now I have written, or after these last few are done, I will have contacted every single person in Precinct 101 who was a newly registered Democrat as of September 1 of 2020 through December 31 of 2021. Wow. I buy the labels. I spend my money on the paper and the ink and print them, and I fold them, and I slap the address labels on them. I buy the labels from the SOE, and I buy the damn stamps, and I mail to them. I will have mailed again to over 1,000 people, and you do the math on that at 50, 58, whatever, 48 cents, 50, whatever it is now with Postal Service. And I don't mind doing it because it's important. It's important, but that's what others can do. They can educate themselves. They can get involved with the party, even if they don't want to be a precinct committee person who tries to make sure that your fellow Democrats in your precinct get out and vote. Even if they don't want to be a poll worker or a poll watcher, they can at least be an informed voter. And last, always vote the entire ballot. In the last race in 2020, when Joe Biden won the presidency, 250 plus thousand votes he got here in Duval County. We had not carried this county for a Democratic presidential nominee for 44 years. Wow. Jimmy Carter. But Biden carries our county, but we had a Democrat who was running for clerk of the court, and he lost by 5,000 votes.
Because we didn't vote.
Because
now,
I'm glad you brought down ballot.
I'm glad you brought that up, voting down the ballot, because a lot of people, they only hear the big ticket people that are running for office, and they do not take the deep dive in looking at all the other local positions and how they won. So let's get into that some more. How do you know about voting down the ballot? Why is that important?
It is important because that's where you really then get your state elected officials and then your local, whether it's a city and then a county, or like it is here, our city and county are synonymous. But those are your local folk. And you've probably heard the old adage, all politics is local. That is so true. I mean, what goes on here in Jacksonville affects us immediately more than a number of the federal legislative things, although they're important. The Voting Rights Act is a federal issue, and that's so very important. But it's at the state level where an awful lot of damage can be done. Just look at Georgia and the things that they were doing to disenfranchise poor folk, students, Black folks. Now, of course, they still won both their Senate seats, and we're thankful. But the same thing goes on right here in our state, and that's not good. Or even decisions that are made here locally, like the drop boxes that we had, and because of the COVID thing, doggone rules changed in the state where there would be fewer of them. There's just so many little things that were done that can make it a little more difficult for people to vote. Let's just look at one other simple thing, the vote by mail. You used to be able to sign up and you were good for a couple of cycles. Now, the total number of cycles that you're covered for it's fewer. I didn't even know that my vote by mail eligibility had expired, except for the fact that through another organization I'm engaged with, happily so, is the Democratic Women's Information Network. And we took on the task of helping notify all the 42,000 people whose vote by mail status had shifted, or those who had. We text those for whom there was a textable number to let them know. And I'm sitting there texting away, and then I get a text from one of my sisters in the organization who my name was on her list. And she says, your thing is expired. I'm thinking, what? No, it hasn't. And, hey, this is Mr. Engaged, right? I didn't even know my status had expired. But we do those things to keep people informed so that they can vote. And if they would, usually when you're voting by mail, you take your time and you work through the ballot. I have my vote by mail ballot now for the runoff election that we're under for the seat that Tommy Hazouri left vacant at his passing. We have a wonderful, talented Democrat, Tracy Paulson, who is the nominee. There were two people in the hunt, obviously only primary, and she was the one who will again have at least 6 Democrats on city council. But it's important for people to be aware of these things so that they can vote. So the vote by mail ballots have been mailed. I got mine about 3 days ago. I'm taking well, it's not a hard one, this one, but when there are a lot of things on a ballot, doing the vote by mail gives you more time to look through, educate yourself on issues so you can vote on all of them. But for your viewers, it is important for them to know, just because you sign up for vote by mail doesn't mean that you have to vote by mail, because you can still go to the polls during early vote or on election day. They will check to see whether or not you had signed up for vote by mail, and it will show that you had, but it would also show that you had not cast, that your ballot had not been returned. And so then they'll give you a regular ballot and you vote right there, either early vote or on election day. So most people think, oh, if I do vote by mail, I gotta do, no, it's an insurance policy.
Yep.
I have always been signed up for vote by mail, and only twice since I've lived here full time, 2008, have I had to use it. And both those times, it was because I had to go to Texas to deal with my mother and her health. And I'd gotten all the way to Lake City and remembered that I had forgotten my vote by mail ballot. I'm trying to put in a 17-hour drive to get to my mama, okay? Right. But let me tell you and your viewers, I've turned it up, or like this, I bagged this big thing up and came back to Jacksonville to get my vote by mail ballot. Why? Because I wanted my vote to count. because the only thing that counts in an election is a vote. And we as Black Democrats must do a better job in making sure that our vote is cast so it can be counted.
That's good.
Critically important. So those are just some tips that I would say. Think about being educated, link with the party because we can help educate and inform you. Maybe you want to volunteer with the party and become a precinct committee person, or maybe all you want to do is join a phone bank where you'll call other Democrats and say, are you thinking about voting? We hope you will. We have some good candidates. You might say, I don't want to talk to people. People get too ugly on the phone. And there are some, it can test you. But on the texting, it's a little different because you can click out, 300 or 400 of them, and then you'll look to see how many responses. Some of the responses can be a little raw, but at least you don't hear it in your ear on the phone. Or you might be someone who says, no, I like knocking on doors to talk to people. Great, we can use you as a canvasser. Others of you might say none of that is of any interest. Well, you might want to simply put your pennies away so that you can buy some bottled water or some fried chicken or some pizzas for people who are in a collective setting somewhere making phone calls or out there walking in the sun. Again, back to the beautiful Sunshine State, so that they'll have some water, that kind of thing. There's something for all of us to be able to do to increase our success in terms of turnout and electing the right kinds of candidates, which for me means Democratic candidates who, in my view, have a better perspective on the kinds of things that we need to have done. If Democrats would have been in control of city council, there never would have been a challenge with regard to whether we would mask up in buildings. We would never have considered penalizing companies if they want to penalize an individual who refuses to wear their mask in that person's business. We wouldn't have done that. If Democrats were in control of our state house and the governor's mansion, we never would have withheld money from superintendents and key administrators because they had the audacity to put the health of children before the pleasure of our governor, who felt that it was okay for kids to go back unmasked and unquarantined. And we have 120,000 kids in Duval County public schools, many of whom have elderly parents and or grandparents or aunts and uncles living with them. And this is before the 12-year-olds and above were even eligible to be vaccinated. That's outrageous. So if we think some of the things that are being done by the other party are without reason, then the only way to change it is to cast our votes for the correct Democrat. And sometimes that correct Democrat is not your choice. Your choice you get to support in the primary, but we must get behind our nominee in the general election, because only the person in the general election has the shot at becoming the successful candidate. And back to Tracy Paulson. She is our nominee. Not everyone supported her, obviously, but she is our nominee. And the question is, are we going to try and have at least 6 Democrats on our city council for the remainder of this term through the elections of 2023 or not? And I hope your viewers will join me and say, we are going to have a Democrat in that at-large Group 3 seat. And then in 2023, we're going to win every single one of those 5 at-large seats. We got to get a few more people to run, but we will do that. We're working hard to do it now. We're working hard to do that now. But and we have people identified in Group 2, Joshua Hicks, who lives out at the beaches. He's declared there. I believe that if Tracy Paulson, or when Tracy Paulson is successful in winning this special election, she'll run again and she'll win again in 3. We have 2 people who are in the hunt for at-large Group 5, Brenda Priestley Jackson, who is the current city councilwoman for District 10, and then a young gentleman, Charles Garrison, who is running. So we need to get somebody in at-large 1 and somebody in at-large 4. Now, some folks will say, but Matt Carlucci is a good Republican. I would agree with that. But there's some good Democrats out there too. And I'm hoping that we'll have someone in that hunt and that we can take that. That's not a slap against Matt, because I think he is a good man and I think he has been a fair city council person. But once again, I'm a Democrat, dedicated Democrat, okay? I'd love to see it there. I'd love to see us get that. But we can win all 5 of those. And even if we only hold on to the other 5 councilmatic district seats, 1, 7, 8, 9, and 10, do the math for me, Teresa. If we have 5 councilmatic district city council people and get all 5 at large, how many do we have?
We have 10.
10, and 10 is what? Control.
Is
we can do it.
Love it.
We can
I
do
love it. I'm
We can
so
do it.
glad you brought up the absentee ballots, because I was looking on the supervisor
Vote by mail
election,
ballot.
right, the supervisor election website the other day, and I saw an expiration date on my absentee ballot. So
Mhm.
we got our absentee ballot. Me and my husband, we took it downtown and
You
turned
go.
it in yesterday. And
Wonderful.
I asked the lady, I say, is there an expiration date on my absentee ballot? She said, yeah, it expires the end of this year. And I said, well, can I renew it now? She said, no, you got to wait till
You have to
January
wait.
2023.
Indeed.
I said,
I
I said,
know.
really?
Yep. See, and of course, they're bucking on people forgetting, not necessarily our local SOE people, but our state legislature, because they're the ones who put these things in place. The bills, so many hurtful bills last session, so many hurtful bills. And I can't remember my numbers now, but I think the election one was SB 90. And I'm pretty sure that's right. And then there was another one that was just even more horrific that was done, and I'm forgetting that number. But SB 90, I believe, was the one that dealt with so many changes around elections, shortening the eligibility period or the length of time that your vote by mail ballot or absentee ballot is valid. The issue around drop boxes, and they continue to always try and challenge how many days in early voting and all of that. Let me give your viewers a little piece of history on early voting. We used to have as many as 21 days of early voting in the state of Florida that the Republicans had put in place because they thought they'd be able to beat the Democrats the longer number of the greater number of days for early voting. Well, when Democrats were eating their lunch on early vote, they kept shrinking. Now it's down to what is it? I think it's a maximum of 14 days, or I think it's something like no less than, except in like a special election circumstance where they're expecting lower turnouts and all, it can be fewer, because we didn't have 14 days in the first round of this current special election, nor will there be 14 days of early voting for the general in February. So that bill, SB 90, did a lot. They get to do what they want because the Republicans far outnumber Democrats in the state house and in the state senate. And that's only because we don't vote. Let's use our county one more time, if I may. We have, I think it's 6 different state representative seats that touch Duval County. State House 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, and 16. Mm-hmm. Right now, we have 13 and 14 on lock. Tracy
Right.
Davis and Angie Nixon, okay?
Mm-hmm.
But interestingly enough, we now have more registered Democrats in State House 15, where a young sister got 40+% of the vote when she ran before, Tamiette Thomas. It's a hyphenated last name, I'm forgetting it. I apologize, Tamiette, if you're listening, but nonetheless, she did an excellent job. And before her, Tracy Paulson had done an exceptional job in running for that seat. But currently, we have more registered Democrats in that State House seat now. We have a shot to pick up at least one more seat in the State House that represents Duval. Now, that would give us 3 out of 6. I like that better than 2.
Right. I saw something about Garrett Dennis is running for a state house representative seat. I want to say it's 15.
Well, no, not 15. It would be either 13 or 14. He's running in the one that Tracy Davis currently holds, and I think that's 13 because she's mine. And because she's termed out, you see.
Gotcha.
So she's termed out. So he is running there. So he's gonna hopefully he'll stay in the hunt. But the state redistricting folk, the House maps, one of the versions, I don't know if it's the one that is the most recent, but one of the things they were tinkering with in the State House was that they were going to redraw our lines for State House stuff in such a way that Angie and Garrett might wind up in the same doggone district.
Right. That's what they were talking about on the national yesterday with Ron DeSantis. He's already drawn his redistricting map.
Yes, version. I mean, it's ridiculous. But once again, they don't need a Democrat to pass anything. That's how challenging it is for us. And again, we have tons of registered Democrats in the state. Although, as you and your viewers might know, for the first time in the absolute foreseeable history, or when you look back on history, for the first time in forever and a day, registered Republicans outnumber Democrats in the state of Florida.
Wow.
When I moved here, we had close to 800,000 more registered Democrats than Republicans. And we still only had one statewide constitutional officer. Alex Sink was the comptroller. That's ridiculous. That's ridiculous. Most people will, you don't need to have odds like that before we spend money. Sometimes we'll be making bets when the odds are only, it's 10 to 1, you ain't gonna make it, or 1,000, 150 million to 1, and we still gonna try to win that lottery. But we won't take a chance in voting for a Democratic candidate in a general election in order for him or her to win. There's something wrong with that picture, and we got to change it. Your question was, what kinds of things can be done? Educate ourselves on candidates, become familiar with the voting cycles. That's always listed on the supervisor of election site. And then vote every race on the ballot. And regardless to who wins the primary, if your horse doesn't win, that's unfortunate. But we need the Democratic nominee to win in the general, because that's when we get to govern.
That's good. I'm glad you brought that up about knowing when the election cycles come up. What I do, because we wear so many hats of people of color, and we have to juggle so many things, especially during this pandemic. I will piggyback on to what Mr. Phillip said. Schedule it on your calendar. You schedule everything else. Schedule when these elections take place. When does early voting starts? Schedule time for you to sit down and investigate these candidates to make sure they are the representation that you want representing you. Are they accessible? Can you have a conversation with them when you need them? And I like the fact that Mr. Phillip, you said you reach out to all your new voters in your district. I think that's amazing. Now, as long as I've been born and raised here, that has never happened. But the text messages I do get. So those I do appreciate. And I am kind, because I realize it actually is people that are texting. And I let them know, yes, I got my ballot. Yes, I'm registered to vote. Yes, I participate. Yeah, that's something I make sure I'm actively involved in, and I make time for it. So in other words, we make time for everything else, ladies and gentlemen. Let's make time to get this voting right, this civic engagement right, because we must. Our future of our children depends on it.
Right. And if I may say this before we move on, because I know there are other questions that you want to get to, and I apologize for being a bit long-winded.
No, this is good, because this is the information we need as people of color for all generations. This radio show is focused on bridging gaps, Mr. Phillip, from the baby boomers to the millennials, because they need to understand why we're so adamant and pushing the importance of voting.
Right. I'd like to say this before moving on to the next category, just to help the viewers understand, again, the power of the voting blocks that we have in the Democratic Party. Just one simple statistic. Registered Black Democratic women total around 87,000 in Duval County. 87,000. That's out of about 158,000 total registered Democratic women. So the single largest voting block of Democratic women in Duval are African-American women. Now listen to this. In the first round of this special election that we had back in November, December, and the general is coming up in February, election day is February 22nd. Prior to that, we'll have about 8 days or whatever that total number is of early voting. Only 81,000 plus people voted in that first round. 81,000 plus. And I just told you we have 87,000 registered Black female Democrats.
Wow.
What would have happened had every single one of those 87,000 Black Democratic women who are registered had voted? And let's say if they would have voted for Tracy Paulson or James Jacobs, the other Democrat in the hunt, either one of those two would have won that race in the primary, because all you need is 50% plus one vote, 50% of all the votes cast plus one, and you eliminate the need to go to a runoff. Just Black women alone would have been able to have guaranteed that. Now, I do not want any viewer or listener to say, oh, he's blaming on Black. No, I'm not. I'm saying to you, look at the power we have as Black registered voters. Because again, what would have happened if all 144,000 registered Black men and women Democrats would have voted? It would have been game over in the first round also.
Exactly.
It would have been game over also. So all I'm saying is know your power. You know, a lot of old women used to tell young women, you need to understand your power, baby. You need to understand your power. And don't let me go too far with this analogy, but a wise old Black woman told me, she told her daughter, baby, I need you to remember that what men are out there looking for, you carrying around with you. Know your power, okay?
Know
it's the
your
same
power.
with voting. It's the same with voting. Know your power. There are more registered Black Democratic women than all registered white Democrats in Duval County.
That's
51,000 plus registered white Democratic women, about 33,000 registered Democratic white men, but they don't equal 87,000, only about 84 plus. Know your power, sisters. You
look, exactly.
Know your power, okay?
I love that. Know your power.
Now let me say this to my brothers. And brothers, understand that all these beautiful Black women are going to do with that power is what they've always done. Drag us along with it, okay? So, but in this instance, we need to help our Black queens and add our 60,000+ votes to your 87 so that we can win every doggone countywide race in Duval County without question.
I love it. I love it. That is why it's so important that, you know, we have to stay involved, because you're right. Because when my sons became of age to vote, I was the one taking them to the polls to make sure they cast their vote, to learn how to vote.
Exactly. That's what we all have to do. And then some people complain about the African American church. We have had more engagement on the part of our African American church community over the years I've lived here than when I first came. So it really is a bit of an unfair knock on them, but there is still so much more room for growth across that spectrum. And if just our Black churches were to at least adopt a couple of things, back to your question of how might we help and get involved, if the churches would say, we're going to every quarter, maybe it's just 4 times a year, we're going to make sure that everybody in our congregation who is new to the city and or has turned 16 will get a voter registration form. Because if they've moved here, they need to re-register here. And once you turn 16, if you're 16 or 17 years old in this state, you can pre-register to vote. You do that, and then when you're 18, you will automatically get your voter registration card. So do it at 16, and you don't have to worry about remembering when you're 18 because it is done. We need to get them. So in my view, a church doesn't need to give that 16-year-old or even that 18-year-old a birthday card. I'd say, well, if you're going to give them a birthday card, make sure that the present that you have inside that card is a voter registration form.
Exactly.
We need to make sure that can happen at the church level. And then let's have our churches sponsor some educational nights about the various ways you can vote, the vote by mail, how you complete it, not telling them who to vote for, but making sure that they're completing it correctly. Most people don't remember to sign it. A lot of people don't remember to put the ballot in the privacy sleeve and then in the envelope. I'm one of them. I'm one of them. I had to open that doggone thing the 2 times I had to mail it. I still had to slice it open and put that dang thing in the privacy sleeve because I'd seal the envelope and then I'd look on the desk and here's the dang privacy sleeve. You know, so even a dedicated Democrat and committed Democrat forgets.
Right.
So have those information sessions at the churches so that the members will know how to do it and do it correctly. That can happen. Those are things we can do. Sorority men and women, the Divine Nine can help us if they do similarly. And many of the frats and sororities are really doing yeoman's work in helping get out the vote. And as you know, that they are required to be nonpartisan in terms of their charters and all, but they can indeed be engaged in civic engagement and advocacy, and many of them are, but there's room for improvement there as well. The 2 chapters of Links can do the same. So many different natural structures can be brought to bear. And then lastly, on that whole thing of what one can do, I like to call it, it's a little more about the voter turnout. I know we're going to get into that a little later, but there's a formula that I'd like to talk about when we get into there that I think might be helpful, but I'm getting ahead of myself.
Okay. I love the call to action for the Black churches. I think that's important. And especially I know when teaching, adopting that hereditary trait, and my mama teaching Sunday school with the young people, I used to talk about it all the time. And I remember when I was in high school, in Jacksonville, they used to come and sign us up for voters registration when we had the senior week activities. That one of the days was when the supervisor elections, a representative would come and would make sure we either was aware about it. We would sign up the form to be registered. So we knew where our precinct was. We knew where we go to vote. We made sure we kept our address current, so we was aware where to vote. So you're not running around the city all day trying to cast your vote because you're not in the right place. So I think it's very important. Those are some amazing suggestions on how individuals and churches can get involved to help with the voter education initiative. So we're going to move and shift right into the voter profile in Duval County. Mr. Phillip talked about it a little bit about the power of the Black woman vote. We have a lot of that, but then he's going to paint us the picture of the voters in Duval County. Why? Because just like he said, we have an upcoming special election on February the 22nd, which I've already cast my vote. I did that through absentee ballot. So if you have not done it yet, if you're on absentee ballot, please make sure you check your mail. Take the time, like Mr. Phillip said, like I have done, me and my husband have done, and go through that ballot and cast your choice. And then you be responsible. Some people send it through regular mail, but for me and my husband, we take it to the election office and make sure it get where it need to be. So they won't say it's hung up in the mail somewhere or it done got lost. So we always take it to the supervisor election office on the inside.
Fantastic. That's great. And I hope your viewers and listeners will follow that practice, because it's just right downtown on the road. Street, and it really is worth doing that, so you don't have to worry about the postal piece, because there are some rules in terms of by which time and date those ballots need to be received at the SOE, and all you need is for there to be a glitch in the postal service going on. And many of your viewers and listeners may not know that under the current Postmaster General, who was appointed by Donald Trump, he did remove many of the high-speed sorting machines from cities and municipalities all across the country. Well, there were something like 57 or 61 of them removed from the state of Florida, 8 of which were removed from right here in Duval County.
Wow.
Now I'll have I rolled over to my office on Merrill and I can't think of the cross street right now. It changes on the north side and the south side of Merrill. But I rolled up in there to ask them, were you one of the sites? Well, no, we weren't, but you really don't have anything to worry about because we're going to keep up. I said, nah, why would you say that? When you don't have the ability to pay people overtime in terms of what the national rules are from the Postmaster General, you cannot pay overtime. You're not going to be adding staff, but you're going to eliminate a machine that was sorting thousands of pieces of mail per minute. And are you going to tell me that understaffed and no undertime individual people are going to be able to replace that and not have it negatively impact mail delivery? I said, look, my name ain't JoJo. I do not eat fried ice cream. You know damn well it's going to negatively impact. Anytime we're sitting up here and it's 6 o'clock and here comes the postal people rolling up, I'm thinking, who's this coming up on my front porch at 6 o'clock? When prior to that time, they were always late morning at the latest, but never noon or after. So, but again, back to who votes. If you vote right, if we would have had a Hillary Clinton in, we wouldn't have had the gentleman named the Postmaster General who was imposing all of these crazy rules, you see. So votes matter.
Yes, it does. It does. Because we suffer. I heard this statement a couple of months ago. Our choices create our circumstances.
Yes. And we must live with those circumstances whether we want to or not.
That's
or
true.
Not.
That is so true.
Not. Yeah.
That
anyway,
is so
you want
true.
me to paint you a picture of our electorate. Well, I did look at the numbers just to give folks some overall things. The total number of registered voters is about 662,000 throughout our county. The breakdown, though, is about 265,800 to be exact, as of today. Registered Democrats, about 228,700 registered Republicans, so about 37,000 voter advantage, Democrats over Republicans. 153,300 NPAs, no party affiliation. Interestingly enough, about 40% of the NPAs are voters of color, and half that number are Black.
Wow.
So back to who's running stuff. Okay, Black voters. So if you add those Black NPAs to the 144,000 or so registered Black Democrats, we can make a whole lot of noise. And then the other minor parties, about 9,300, 9,400. And then there's what they call the LPF, and I keep forgetting what that is, but it's the real minor parties, and only 2,709 of those. And that gets you to that number of 662,000. But once again, Democrats are dominant. Within the Democratic registered voters, about 157, 158,000 are Democratic women. Of that, about 87,000 happen to be African-American women, but around 105,000 of the 157,000 Democratic women are women voters of color. So if we add all of the beautiful women of color together, again, a very significant number. I've often said in settings like this, that, the doggone Democratic women can get folks elected without us, without the rest of us. But thank goodness there are a few of us who are going to turn out and vote who happen to be male. But then I would like for people to be aware of the district breakdowns. And clearly districts 1, 7, 8, 9, and 10 are heavily Democratic. Those are for sure solid Democratic districts. Then you'll look at like District 13 and then districts 11 and 2 and 3. Yeah, they're pretty solidly Republican. But we have 5 that can be contested.
So let's pause for a minute. So District 1, that's the Arlington area in Jacksonville.
Correct.
District 2 is what area of town? Because some people are not familiar with
District
the district
2 that's the next one going east from District 1. So it's going toward the beaches. So It's still Arlington. It would be like where District 1 would be considered West Arlington, and then East Arlington, if you will, it's District 2. And then north of the river is still District 2 as well. And then District 3 is kind of just directly south of District 2. Now, up along the coast, so it's District 13, and that's, again, a Republican district. But when you then start moving back west, you get to Districts 3, 4, 5, and then 6. All of this is on the east side of the river. And then, of course, District 11 is on the south end of our county, but still on the east side of the river. So you have 11, 13, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, and 2, who are east of the river, and a little bit of 2 north, because the river takes a turn to go east. But then on the west side of the river, you have, of course, then 7, 8, 9, and 10. And then on the south end of the county, west side of the river, you have districts 14 and 12. 14 kind of runs up along the river, and then east of it, going out 10, going west, is District 12.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Again, just want to bring some context for those that's listening, because this is information we should know. What your district number is. Let's go back to basics. You need to know what district you're in, especially moving to Jacksonville, because that connects you to who your representative is. Exactly.
And understand that there are 5 at-large city council persons, and they're responsible for the whole county. They have to live in one of the 5 geographic specific areas of the county in order to run for that group seat, but they are responsible for and must be responsive to all of the voters in Duval County, you see. So people need to understand, when you're voting for city council, you don't have only one city council person. Most people think, oh, well, I'm in District 8, so I got to vote for District 8. You vote for your District 8 city council race, but you also get to vote in all 5 of the at-large. So
that's where you was talking about earlier, voting down the ballot.
Voting down the ballot. And so many people I've chatted with say, when I ask them, how many city council people can you vote for when they're up? And they'll usually say, well, it must be a trick question, so it must be more than one, huh? Well, I said, well, yes, it's more than one. And they'll usually say 2, because they'll think, oh, yeah, in my at-large. So I get to vote for my district and my at-large. I said, that part is true, but you also get to vote for the other 4 at-large. And many people don't even know.
Wow.
Let's go back a few cycles when we had Democrats running. If I'm not mistaken, they were running in all 5 at-large. We had Kim Daniels running for a second election in at-large 1. Crescent Benning was running for re-election and won. I can't remember who was up in 3, but I think it may have been the first run for Tommy Hazouri. And then we had Juanita Powell Williams, who ran in at-large 4, and we had Jacoby Pittman, who ran in at-large 5. So we had a Democrat in all 5 of those hunts. Now, Jacoby Pittman got the highest number of election votes. I'm forgetting now, but it must have been in the 90s, low 90s or mid 90s or whatever. Juanita Powell Williams got 74,000. You know, how in the heck does Juanita get 20-some thousand fewer votes than Jacoby Pittman? But how did Crescent Benning and Tommy Hazouri each get 100,000 and the others didn't? And then Kim Daniels, unfortunately was defeated. I say unfortunately because I'm a Democrat. She got beat by a Republican. Okay, so unfortunate. Some people have different opinions of some of our candidates. I still believe I'd rather have a Democrat that I might have an issue with over a Republican who I know I have an issue with.
Right.
Generally, in terms of policy. Now, again, but I don't want to get into that because that can be a losing battle trying to decide, who you like, who you don't. All I'm saying to my good Democratic friends is you can't govern if you don't win. And I'd rather have 10 Democrats in order for us to have control, run the risk of maybe losing one, but we might have the ability to pick up one Republican to still give us 10 so we can govern. So I still believe in, I'd rather have a Dem than not.
Right, I understand. And I know a lot of people, they vote. Sometimes we vote with our feelings and our emotions, but a lot of times I look at, can the person do the job? Do they have the work ethic? Can they really push policy changes that we need that will benefit people of color? That's what we have to look at in voting, because you're not going to get along with everybody. But if that person is equipped, have the relationships, and they can get the job done, and they have the experience for the policies that they're pushing, wouldn't that person be beneficial to serve in that seat as a Democratic person versus you voting for the whole opposite, a whole totally different party if you don't have no other choices?
I share that position very strongly. And the other piece that I try to remind people of is Democratic voters have never had a problem in getting up in the face of Democratic elected officials. We are going to get up in their face. You can ask Kim Daniels that. I mean, she knows that people will get up in her face. So we don't have a problem in chastising and beating up our own. So I don't understand the problem people have, and then elect them. Even if it wasn't your first choice, you still need to have them because generally speaking, the policies and preferences of Democrats tend to be more in line with many of us, whether it's a woman's right to choose, whether it's having a real concern about capital punishment, having a real interest in wanting to improve the relationship between law enforcement and the African-American community, wanting to push civil citations as opposed to always sending our Black and brown boys to jail and establishing a record. And then we have people in the state legislature trying to make sure that you can't even expunge the records of young folk and stuff. You see what I'm saying? It's important for us to have Democrats in because we can at least stop some of that nonsense that the other side is pushing, because it is generally going to negatively affect us. If we had 10 Democrats on city council, when Tommy Hazouri, before he died, was suggesting that huge chunk of money that they had in the budget could go as a down payment against the cost to put more of the doggone properties that are on septic tank on sewer. It was just a down payment, but I can't remember the figure. I wish I could remember it right now, Teresa, but I have forgotten, and I apologize to you and your viewers, but it was a significant chunk. If we would have had 10 Democrats on there with guarantee control, I know that would have passed. It would have passed. We would have had a down payment against that cost of getting those folks off septic and on the sewer, which, as I understand it, was a part of the great compromise that gave way to the consolidated government.
Exactly. And those are the issues and the reasons why I push so much as yourself, why we need to vote and remind local government, regardless whoever is in office, they still need to settle the consolidation agreement, because there are a lot of black and brown families still on septic tank. Why?
Right. And granted, and there's also a large number in Mandarin, true enough. But the point is, there has not been even-handed distribution of public dollars across all 14 of our districts. And that could change if we had control of city council, and then not stop there, but if we had control of the mayor's office, supervisor of election, the sheriff, if we had control of the clerk of the court, the tax appraiser, the tax collector, property appraiser, all of those things. And we can do it because of our numbers. Every countywide race in Duval County could be won based on the numbers of registered Democrats.
That's good.
Because again,
if
100% of the registered Democrats vote and 100% of the registered Republicans, there's a 37,000 vote gap. Now, what the NPAs do can swing that, but when Black people alone have close to 22-25% of that, if they track Democratic, we can stay off a pretty strong Republican support from NPAs because we can get 25 to 40% of those NPAs in our column. And there are plenty of Caucasian NPAs who are absolutely in line with Democratic principles. Maybe not all of them, but they don't reject them.
Right.
So we can win all the countywide races if we would do it. And certainly if our turnout would, if we got to 95% every time, I don't know that there's a race we'd ever lose. And that can happen yesterday.
And
but
that
it
will
needs
be
to happen on February 22nd for Tracy Paulson in this special election. That I can tell you. It needs to happen.
Exactly. And that will be a major disruption. And see, that's what the Republican Party knows.
Yes,
they know.
And they are gearing up. They are prepared to win that seat because this is the closest they've had in being able to win that Group 3, that at-large Group 3 seat in a while. And they want that seat. But all I hope is that Democrats want to hold on to it more than Republicans want to flip it.
Exactly. And I agree with Tracy Post. I looked at her background. She has that social work background. You know, she sits on the board of Agape. So yeah, I did my homework on her. Right. Because, you know, we have a lot of health disparities with Black and brown individuals in our community. And for someone who has that perspective and that lens will really help navigate and drive why we need to fix the septic tank issue in Jacksonville, because our environment has a lot to do with us getting sick a lot.
I agree with you. She's also a board member at Hubbard House. And, you know, we have a very significant number of women of color who fit the profile for those who receive the services at Hubbard House. I think Tracy Paulson is an excellent candidate. Now, I also know James Jacobs, and I have worked with James, and James knows that I'm very supportive of him. I mean, a young brother wanting to be engaged civically, you know, how can you not want to applaud, you know, that? So again, it's never, oh my God, you can't like one if you like the other. Of course you can. Of course you can. I mean, you're going to vote for one or the other, but the bottom line is that the way I always like to say it, when people say, well, who are you going to vote for? I said, I'm going to vote for the nominee in the general. That's what I'm going to do. But, you know, of course you're going to vote for, you know, your horse in the primary, but the real deal is not the primary. The real deal is the general election.
Exactly.
And
so my thing is
for the Democratic nominee every time.
Right. So with Tracy and Coach James, both of them have attributes our community needs.
Absolutely.
Seriously. So what I like about and what I have been seeing with the Democratic Party since the 2020 election, how other Democrats are helping in when they don't win their race, how they join the bandwagon and help the one that did win to get other folks to come out and vote, to help shift their supporters over. Come on, let's win it for the party. In other words, it's not an I mentality, it's a we mentality.
Indeed. And that's something I have pushed as long as I've been here, because every single cycle I develop my own list from the SOE pages of the filed Democratic candidates. And I try to keep them informed of the different things that the various clubs and caucuses of the Democratic Party are doing, you know, just so that they won't miss an opportunity to be present where they, in my view, ought to be. And I also am the co-chair of the Democratic Women's Information Network's Candidate Identification Committee, where we work intentionally to keep those filed candidates aware of what's going on. And we even push information out to them about potential endorsements and money that can flow their way from various resources in the state, including the Democratic Women's Club of Florida that DWIN is a chapter of. They have an endorsement process, but they don't endorse at the primary level. It's only if there's multiple candidates, you know, we don't pick one or the other. We look at the endorsement post the primary, and then there's a possibility of money and support. So we do those things. But let me say this as I finish this segment on our profile. Out of those 14 districts, I mentioned that 5 or so are flippable. I never had a chance to tell you why I believe it. Let's go back to that. District 4, the Republican advantage in terms of registered voters is only 302. 302 more registered voters than Democrats. In District 5, that's Coach James's district, the advantage Republicans have there is 482 votes. Negligible. So I've always hoped that Coach James would have run for City Council District 5, because that's where he filed first for that a couple of cycles back. And then he shifted to run at large in Group 3 against Tommy Hazouri and one other candidate. But that's an individual's prerogative, absolute prerogative. But I maintain then, and I do now, I would hope that Coach James would look at filing to run in 2023 in District 5, because if he winds up being the only Democratic candidate, which he would have been 2 cycles back, and there were at least 2, if not 3 Republicans, they're going to split their vote. We only would have 1, and there are enough registered Democrats. Again, they're only outnumbered by 482. There are enough where you put those registered Democrats in District 5, plus the possibility of getting a significant number of the NPAs who are not white, who tend to track Democrat. If you're of color, you tend to track that way, not exclusively. But the point is, we can win 5 because of that low delta between registered Democrats and Republicans. So 4 and 5 are flippable. Then look at District 11. That's a stretch. They have 3,086 more registered Republicans than Democrats, but it's still doable with the right level of turnout of Democrats. It's doable. And then District 12, the advantage is 869 registered Republicans over Democrats. Flippable. And District 14, most people don't even know that District 14 has a very slim advantage of registered Democrats. Democrats are up by 121 registered voters in District 14. So again, 4, 5, 11 is a stretch, but I keep it in the hopper. 12 and 14 can clearly move from red representatives on City Council to blue. It can happen, my sister, with the right Democratic turnout. Now, let me quickly say this. A significant percent of the registered Democrats in each one of those 5 districts are what? Black. You hear what I said? So people are running around here thinking that Black people are in 7, 8, 9, and 10, and then a sprinkling in 1. There's more than a sprinkling in 1. Thank you very much. 30 plus, they're almost 36% or whatever. But we can win those others, not because Blacks outnumber whites in those districts, because they don't, but there are enough of them to be added to the other Democrats who are not of color, and we can flip those seats. You hear what I'm saying? We can flip them. So Black people are dispersed rather nicely throughout the county. People just think they're all in 7, 8, 9, 10, and 1, but they're not. But they're not. Right. That's true. And we would be the voters of difference. We can provide the margin of victory for Democrats in 4, 5, 11, 12, and 14.
That's good. That's good. That's a powerful voter profile. Ladies and gentlemen, you're hearing it right here with Mr. Phillip. If you have not voted, if you have gotten disgusted since the 2020 election with all this foolishness, do not get caught up with the hype. They're doing it to keep you from voting. You need to vote.
Exactly.
You need to vote. If you don't do anything else, you need to vote. If you're not sure who to vote for, you need to get in touch with the organization Mr. Phillip has mentioned. You need to educate yourself. To my Black pastors and my women pastors, men and women pastors, you need to start educating your congregation. I mentioned this during the pandemic, Mr. Phillip, before I even met you, that the churches had power during this pandemic because they got the resources. They got that prayer line, which can become a phone bank. They got members who are retired and ain't working, but they can text to get the word out, to make sure all their members and their family members are registered to vote to get to the polls.
Exactly.
That is how the Black church can leverage and help increase this voter profile and flip those seats that you're talking about. If we just pull our resources together with what we're already using for ministry.
Yes, and that's our historical practice.
Yes. You
cannot separate Black community civic engagement or voting. You cannot separate that from the Black church. Exactly. And anyone who does not understand that Black church history is inclusive of voting and voting advocacy and getting out the vote, then they don't know Black church history. They don't know Black church history. That's the history of our successful civil rights movement. It came out of and was led through the Black church, not around it, not in spite of it, but by it and because of it. And we need to simply remember our history, on that, because there's nothing partisan about voter registration or voter education and voter advocacy and helping people get to the polls. You're not telling people who to vote for. You're facilitating their engagement in that process. And there is a difference between doing that and being partisan and then run the risk of losing your not-for-profit status and stuff. So the church is crucial to this. Now, to the question of why we might not be turning out, because I know I keep talking about, the turnout is well, some of the things that may impact that is we're used to losing here in Duval, whether people like it or not. We lose more races than we win, but we do win some. But I think people just simply have accepted the fact that we're going to lose. That's the wrong mindset. We got to look at it. We can win because the numbers suggest it. But also, candidates. Many people say, oh, we never filled enough candidates, and how come there are races where Democrats aren't running? This is what I would say to your viewers and your listeners. Ask yourself why you haven't run.
That's good.
I'm challenged by people who will complain that so-and-so didn't run. The issue is, why didn't you? And if they're wondering, well, why don't you run, Mr. Minor? Let me be real clear. Mr. Minor doesn't run because Mr. Minor doesn't have the sufficient discipline to be always tactful and responsible, and some might say politically correct when I'm dealing in some public setting. Said another way, I can go real base on people. It has often been said that I can go from 0 to bitch in 3 seconds, and that doesn't work well in a public setting. You see what I'm saying? So I know my limitations. So I know that my best commitment to this thing called voting and voting advocacy is for me to try to educate, inform, empower, and then engage others to get out and vote. That's where my strengths are. But I wish I had the personal discipline to run. I really do. But I know I don't. And at 71, I've already put in more days than I have left. There's not enough time for me to learn how to get that part right. There just isn't, sister. I'm just keeping it real. I'm just keeping it real. So I have to be a supporter. But that's why I'm co-chair of that candidate identification committee. Because, and people can tell, I'm always trying to ask somebody, why don't you think about running here? We're currently looking to try to find somebody in 4, 5, 11, 12, and 14 to run, because those are flippable districts. And so the only way they can flip is if we have a Democratic candidate. You see what I'm saying? That's the only way. And so we have to do it. So a lot of reasons why we haven't turned out, but I don't think that they are sufficient to keep us from changing that practice. Right. Because if we do this, if we accept the fact that we only want to take care of ourselves, I always tell people, commit yourself to getting 100% of your household to vote. And then 80% of every other structure you're a part of. So 80% of your church members, your faith community colleagues, 80% of the people in your immediate work area. You don't have to do your whole company. That might be nice, but just your little work environment. And again, some of them aren't going to vote your party, but the issues you want them to vote, you do. But then many of you are in book clubs. Get 80% of your sorority, your fraternity. If you're in the links, get that. If you're a member of the 100 Black Men, I don't care. But 80% of every other structure you're a part of, everybody got a drinking buddy. You know, a little group that, we gonna meet even if the spouses don't know. They think that we gonna meet on Fridays after work. We've been doing Thursdays at 4 o'clock for years. But get 80% of your drinking group to vote. Book club, whatever it is. If you're a scout leader, Girl Scout or Boy Scout, get 80% of your troop folk who are 18 and above to vote. Make sure that if you're working with young folk who are 16 and 17, make sure that all of them are registered to vote. You see what I'm saying? But it's that 100% of your household and 80% of everywhere else you are. And we can get it done.
I love that.
And there are 10 Democratic clubs and caucuses for people to engage with. I happen to be a paid member in 5 of them. I'm with the Black Caucus, Asian Caucus, Hispanic Caucus, Senior Caucus, and Democratic Women's Information Network. And if you ask the current president and a few of the other officers of the Jacksonville Young Dems whether or not they can count on me, their answer would be absolutely yes. Ask the doggone President Hannah Moore of the Beaches Democratic Club whether or not if she calls me, I'll call her back. The answer to that is yes. So I try to be out there. The Environmental Club, the LGBT Stonewall Alliance, likewise the Progressive Group. I communicate with all of them because we're all important. No one of those 10 can be left behind, and I try to engage with all of them. I serve on the Democratic Executive Committee's Club and Caucus organization. It's called the DEC Organizations Committee. And so I'm an active member there. And we're constantly sending information to all 10 of those groups to try to get them to engage in things. That's just the way that I roll. But lastly, I mentioned a formula that I wanted to share with your viewers about how we might mobilize folk. I call it my 1-3-2 plan. Every single individual identify 3 others who will each identify 2 others for a unit of 10. And then you all just decide what it is you're going to do and then get busy and do it. You might say, we are each going, in this group of 10, we are each going to identify 50 people that we're going to call or text or go knock on their door to make sure that they vote in the next cycle. Well, 10 people times 50 is only 500, but guess what? That's good. That's good. Hillary Clinton lost by 917 votes in this county.
Wow.
That 500 is more than half the number of votes she needed to carry this county. You see what I'm saying? But what happened if those 10 said, we're not going to get 50, we have enough time, we're going to get 100. Well, 10 times 100 is 1,000. That would have been enough for Hillary Clinton to win Duval County, because she only needed 917, and we just did a model that would get 1,000 people to the polls. One person getting 3 others to each get 2 others for a unit of 10 to do whatever it is you think you want to do. And it might be that all you're going to do is encourage all of your family members who can to sign up for vote by mail. So at least they're going to get that ballot, and hopefully they'll turn it in or they'll still go and vote. But that might be all you do. Or it might be that your group of 10 says, we are each going to make our cars available for people who will mask up, to get them to the polls. That might be what they do. Those 10 might say, no, I think what we're going to do is be poll watchers so we can make sure that the process is open and fair and not intimidating to people. Guess what? We need it. We have 199 precincts in the 14 districts in Duval, and on election day, all 199 are open. So we need 199 poll watchers. You don't get paid, but we need you. And I poll watch every single early vote cycle. I don't do every day anymore, but I do multiple days, and then I do election day.
Wow.
But many of our members in our clubs and caucuses are poll workers, and they can make a couple of $100, a day on some of these assignments. And if you're a deputy or the election manager, you make even more. So, it can be a few extra pennies for folks. But it might be that group of 10 would decide they're going to each do the training to be a poll worker. Great. It might only be that those 10 are going to tell people to tune in to the Teresa W. Gamble Courageous Conversations podcast, okay, because the sister got it going on, okay? But it makes me no difference what they do.
Right.
I just need that unit of 10 to do it. And what if that unit of 10 said, each of us are going to try to start one other group of 10. Now we have 10 times, now we have 100 individuals doing X. And now 100 individuals getting 100 individuals to do something. I don't know what that is. 100 times 100 is what? Is that 10,000?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's 10,000. Oh, Jesus.
That's
okay?
a lot.
You see what I'm saying? It's a lot.
That is a
and
lot.
then just keep multiplying. What if those other 10 said, we're going to get 10? And that 10 said, we're going to get 10. You see what I'm saying? And all I'm speaking to is what? It's a movement, my sister. And what was the civil rights movement other than a collection of individuals thinking similarly and doing in common? That's all it is. And we need another movement, sister, because we can move this county from red control to blue control. And I believe firmly that when Democrats win, the public wins.
I totally agree with you. I totally agree, because historically, to me, Democrats have always done the work. We've always been in the trenches. We always align with policies and want to change for the better, for the embetterment, not just for us, but for everybody.
But for everyone, right? For everyone.
Right.
For everyone.
Exactly.
Indeed. So that's a little bit about that voter profile in Duval County.
I love the way you broke it down, because these are the numbers that we need to know, because we know we have people in our community. They are number person. It has to make sense to them. So
Yes.
if this didn't make sense to you, what Mr. Phillip said, again, you need to do your due diligence, do your homework. We're in a season where we got to move from procrastination to progression. Because
absolutely,
our voter status is in the state of an emergency, and this is where we got to act. We got to be decisive. We can't take 6 months to decide what we're going to do. We got to be able to get the information, do your due diligence, do your research, and make a decision. You have to exercise your right to vote. Our children are watching. And it's sad that we're still fighting this same fight that our ancestors are fighting. But it's not fair to sit back and say, well, this is not my battle, or I'm picking choosing my battle. So why are you doing that to pass this fight on to our children when the fight has came to us?
Yes.
So we need to get up off of do nothing and start doing something. And with that point being said, redistricting is really huge right now, especially in Florida. And we finna move into the redistricting in Duval County, because there's some upcoming events and some meetings that all of you can attend. I don't know if there's a streaming option, but if you can't, you need to try to be in the room or find out about it. So Mr. Phillip, let's talk about redistricting first, so we can educate our listeners and our viewers what that is and what does that mean for Black and brown individuals in Florida, Jacksonville, Duval County.
Certainly. Thank you for this opportunity. The process of redistricting does happen every 10 years. It follows the census. So typically it's the year following the census data being available. The full country involves itself in redrawing boundaries for our representative government. The states have the state legislatures have the responsibility of drawing the lines for their U.S. representatives, and then within most cities and municipalities, your county and or your city, and for us, that's one and the same. But so here, the city council has that awesome responsibility of drawing the lines for how our local government is drawn. It's important to share immediately that the rules for drawing or doing redistricting at the state level are different from what they are at the local level. And so folks need to know that just because X is going on at the state level doesn't mean that it will automatically go on at the local level, because the rules are not identical. But our local process, which is where I have spent more of my time and will try and center my comments, began really last summer when the census data was available. And it was actually a little late in getting to us. So our city council was at a touch of a disadvantage in terms of timing. But the data was brought forward. As we did 10 years ago, the city council chose not to go outside and have an outside agency do the drawing of the maps, but consulted with Bill Killingsworth, who is the director of our planning and development office for the city of Jacksonville. My own view is that Bill Killingsworth is absolutely able and capable of doing a good job. And in my view, he has done what he is tasked to do. But many other municipalities push that responsibility out to a third party. And it could very well be that that's something that our citizens might want to see happen in the future. And that would require some changes in our charter. But once again, people back to voting. If that's something we want to do, it's a voting situation. We can get that doggone charter changed, but only with the right individuals making sure that they're doing all of the right things to get the language crafted the way we want. And then when it's up for a vote, either voting it up if it's pushed to the people, or making sure we have voted in representatives who are going to vote in alignment with the wishes of the people. You see, so again, voting continues to be important, most importantly in this redistricting process. So the process did have multiple meetings of our city council folk. There was a special committee on redistricting named. There was a chair and then a vice chair. The vice chairs who DWIN, as well as for our future, had most of their interaction with Danny Beckton, who is the city council person in District 11. Actually, all of the people on the special committee were invited to consider coming before DWIN. Danny Beckton did agree to. And so he was one of 3 people that DWIN had come and talked to us and any other interested parties about the redistricting process. Danny Beckton, the vice chair of the redistricting committee, Andrew Pantanzi, who is a journalist, who is the founding editor of Changing Florida, the Tributary, excellent piece that is focused narrowly on redistricting, both at the local level here in Duval and statewide. Excellent articles. People really need to link with that. Make it a favorite on your Facebook, on your online stuff, or your bookmark it or whatever. I'm not all that great with technology, but I know that you can do that. And you need to do that with his publication. But then we also had a person from All on the Line in Fair Districts be our 3rd speaker. So we, DWIN, has made a commitment to try and educate the community on this very critical process. We started back in September and then had a presentation in October, and then the 3rd of the 3 series was in November. Following that, we then, many of us we attended what were called member-to-member meetings of the City Council Special Committee on Redistricting. They chose to meet among themselves to try to hash out a lot of their guiding principles, on their working guidelines for how they wanted to approach this process. But from our view, from DWIN's view, and for our future, we were saddened that those meetings were held principally during the day when most non-retired people are at work. So the ability for Joe Blow or Joe Q citizen or resident to be participatory in it was really very limited, very limited. Also at those member-to-member meetings, the public did not have access to hard copies of the maps that they were reviewing, and the maps were on screen, but the screens, of course, were facing the city council people, not the public. So we couldn't see the maps, not only because we didn't have a hand copy, but because we couldn't see the screens that they were reflected on. So it was very much, in spite of it being an open meeting, it was closed in terms of who had access to the data that was being discussed. But we went to those meetings, and there were a number of comments that could be made depending on who happened to be chairing the meeting. Then there was a wonderful town hall meeting that Andrew Pantanzi did, and he did it down at the old library, the Ed DuPont building, which drew a goodly number of people, cross-section of our community. And he had a person from our planning office, an African-American gentleman, Dennis Enos. I can't remember his first name now, and then Dr. Marcella Washington, a retired faculty member from FSCJ, a political scientist extraordinaire. But the 3 of them, boy, they burnt the house down in terms of information that we needed to know about the historical nature of communities that were in some ways disrupted with redistricting over time, and how, in some people's view, some of the goings on the part of our city council in this process were a little less transparent, and nor were they necessarily in the best interest of our citizens. So there were multiple meetings, that's what I'm simply trying to say, and a number of us made it our business to be present at all of them. When we did our series, when DWIN did the series, we advanced questions in advance to our speakers because we needed them to respond to questions that we had about this process and where it might be going, and the whys and the why comes of some things. So we have pulled together copious amounts of information on things. Then a special group of us met with Bill Killingsworth, the consultant, just to get his perspective on this process. Very enlightening, very enlightening. And we also read the memo from the General Counsel's office in terms of things that they suggested ought be looked at, not required, in terms of how you would approach redistricting. Some of the things that were suggested in that General Counsel document were in alignment with what the US Supreme Court and other judicial jurisdictions have said would be preferable in how you begin the process of redistricting. Things like using voting age population versus total population when you're trying to divide up your boundaries so that you wind up with a quote unquote, a balanced or an equal number of people in each of your, in our instance, 14 districts. About 71,000 was the magic number, but the law allows for you to have plus or minus 5%, 5% over that, 5% under. So you'll look at the proposed maps and you'll see that some of the districts are only about 67, 68,000 folk. Others are as high as 71, 72,000, but it still fits legally. but other things that are taken into consideration. You are not supposed to pack a lot of folk in. Some people would argue, and I'm one of them, that District 7, 8, 9, and 10 are packed with Democrats, and more specifically, Black Democrats. When that happens, it makes it very hard then for the other 10 districts to have enough other Democrats, but particularly African American Democrats, to then give Democrats who happen to be Black a greater opportunity of electing a candidate of their choosing, which is, if you will, the goals, if you will, of a positive and fair and reflective redistricting structure. So we started with our city council people not unpacking the packed districts. You're not supposed to crack though either. You're not supposed to break up districts unnecessarily, particularly if it will then bring harm to individuals, appropriate groups. And I say appropriate because the concern is based on race, but you're not supposed to drive it on race unless what you're getting ready to do might negatively affect them. But you can play all kinds of games that you want to in terms of a political party. But the point I'm trying to make is that our own city council folks started with not wanting to be particularly disruptive in what the current maps look like. They felt that a lot of that had been done 10 years early, and they thought we ought to preserve some things like, well, if we can help it, we don't want to cross the river any more than we already do. And only District 2 crosses on the north and south side of the river on the east side of our county. They felt that in their infinite wisdom that there was something good, right, and just about trying to be mindful of where incumbents were. I happen to be a voter who disagrees with that. Again, when you are attempting to make sure that you have boundaries that are reflective of good faith efforts so that the greatest opportunity for the greatest number of people to elect candidates of their choice happen, then the fact that somebody might wind up in a district other than the one they started in is a big so what to me. And as I said to them, I do not understand protecting an incumbent to be a state of Florida statute driven requirement, and it is not. But our city council people seem to feel that that was still something that they ought to be mindful of. I simply disagree. I simply strenuously disagree. But that's a part of the process. So all of this has been taken into consideration. The city council, they have worked hard. They've worked hard, I'll give them that. I just don't agree with some of the things. Like an individual council person, if he or she didn't like a map that was being proposed, they could just say, I don't like it. And generally their colleagues said, okay, throw it out. I think that's entirely too much power, in my view, for any one person to have, because perhaps that map that they summarily dismissed would have been better for a greater number of people countywide in order to better increase the ability for folks to elect candidates of their choosing. Let's just use 7, 8, 9, and 10, where you have so many Democrats and so many Black Democrats. Some of the city council persons in those districts were concerned about picking up too many others because they were concerned that they might lose their power to win elections. Not so much just them themselves, but any Democrat. Well, if you look at some of the districts with 28,000 registered Democrats, of which 21,000 are Black, if you pick up 1,700 Republicans or 3,000 Republicans and maybe only another 800 Democrats, well, add 800 Democrats to 21,000, you get, you get almost 29,000 Democrats. And if you've added 3,000 Republicans and you only have about 7,000 in your district now, they're going to go up to 10, and your Democrats are still at 29,000. What in the hell makes you think you can't win? That kind of stuff is crazy to me. But right. Those are the kinds of things we've been up against in this process. But many of us have been pushing back. And now we're at the point where the proposed maps have been approved by City Council, and they now move to the Rules Committee. And the Rules Committee is led by one of the few Democrats on City Council, Brenda Priestley Jackson, Councilwoman from District 10. And she is having not 3, but 4 public hearings where these maps will be available and they will be open for community input and comment, with the possibility that changes can indeed be made to these maps if a sufficiently compelling argument can be posed. The dates of those, I don't know if you have the ability to put that in the chat room, but they are. They're Thursdays. The first one is February 27th. It will be at Ed White High School. All of them will be from 6 o'clock until 7:30. So Thursday, January 27th, Ed White High School. The second, Thursday, February 3rd, Atlantic Coast High School, in the auditorium at each of these places. The third, February 10th, First Coast High School auditorium. And then the fourth and final, February 17th at William M. Raines High School Auditorium. Those are the locations, dates, and times. And the public is wholeheartedly invited, and I dare say they must turn out en masse. There are a number of organizations that have put together recommendations that we think are worthy to be shared at these meetings. We have put together tip sheets on how you can build your own set of questions, and then you can transpose your questions onto the form that you must fill out if you want to speak. There is a speaker form that must be completed and turned in. And so folks can use the tip sheet that we've developed to build their questions, but they got to put it on that official form. So they need to get to the sites early, get the forms and turn them in. But they can even go to the Rules Committee page on City of Jacksonville and find the instructions for all of this. But many of our groups, particularly Democratic Women's Information Network, we are going to put these 4 documents up on our website. That website is www.duval.org. There will be links to those 4 documents that will give them a sense of what we have been considering, what our concerns and questions were, how we view the process, what we believe are significant recommendations that ought to be considered. Some for now to affect these maps, others for 10 years out when we do this process again. And then that tip sheet for how you can prepare for any one of the 4 public hearings. So we've been busy, and this is a group, not just Democratic women, but we are in partnership with the Hispanic Caucus, with the Black Caucus, with the Senior Caucus, with the Jacksonville Young Democrats, the Beaches Democratic Club, the Beaches Activist Movement. We have representatives from, of course, our county party. The Democratic Executive Committee has been front and center in all of this work with us for our future. Now, again, they're nonpartisan, but they are equally as concerned about this. League of Women Voters, the National Organization of Women, their local chapter, and then by extension, structures like Indivisible and March. We have representatives from all of them, and the document is, if you will, a community document. But nonetheless, remember that website for DWIN, because that's where we'll be driving people to access and view and hopefully utilize those 4 very critical documents that they can use to prepare for their absolute engagement in these public hearings, because this will be our last shot to have an impact on these maps before they will then be recommended to the full council, city council, for approval.
Wow. Okay, give us that website again, Mr. Phillip.
www.duval.DWIN, that's DUVALDWIN.org. And people can start going there. Those things are not up because we're putting the final touches. We just had our last collective meeting on the wordsmithing for these documents just last night. We hope to have them polished off by Friday, and therefore the final or finished product up by this weekend on that site. And there'll be other ones of our groups are going to be doing email distributions of the documents to people on their respective mailing list and any of their other circles of influence contact lists that they have. Because we need the public to be, 1, aware, 2, informed, 3, prepared, and 4, show up.
Now that 4th one is more important, is showing up.
It absolutely is.
So I want to encourage everyone, if you cannot, you need to make sure you, again, put it on your calendar. You got Thursday, January the 27th, Ed White Senior High School Auditorium, 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Thursday, February 3rd, Atlantic Coast High School Auditorium, 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. February 10th, First Coast High School Auditorium, 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. And February 17th, William M. Raines Auditorium, 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. You need to make your face be in the place about this redistricting. Those of you that may remember when Congressman Corrine Brown was in office, we went through this with her district, where they went through saying her district was too big because she ran from Tallahassee all the way down past Central Florida, and they wound up breaking up her district. This is what we're going through again for those that wasn't here during that time, or those that was here during that time and didn't understand what was going on. So Mr. Phillip is educating us on how we need to get involved when these maps are being withdrawn with the Census Bureau. That is why the former administrator, the 45th president, was trying to stop the census from counting. So this is why you need to get involved, because this census was conducted under his administration.
Right.
So with that being said, Mr. Phillip, you've told us what redistricting is and what is going on now with City Council, and the Rules Committee of City Council is having these hearings that's coming up, and you telling the community the 4 things they need to do. But what things do you believe can improve this process between now and the next time we're up for redistricting in 10 years?
Well, I think many things are important. So I don't want your viewers to think that the first thing out of my mouth means that it's most important, but because they all really are. But we have to improve the public access to the process on the front end. That has to change. We cannot have something as critically important as redistricting happening essentially in a vacuum, with very limited opportunity for citizens to even hear, let alone to engage, but to hear and be a part. So that issue of public access while the process is going on really must happen. I further believe, and many of us who've worked on this believe, that we need to take a very close look at the formally passed statewide amendments 5 and 6, which really addressed a fairer and more transparent and representative way for redistricting to be done in the state. And the example you gave, that was done at the state level, not the local level, with Corrine Brown's district. And you're right, it ran north-south, and they shifted and now runs east-west. But interestingly enough, back to the games that people can play, they look at the density and representation of various groups. Well, there may be a similar number of African Americans, for example, in the newly drawn lines east and west, as there were when it was north and south. But if you look closely, a goodly number of those Black individuals in the current boundaries are in jail and not able to vote. And even the doggone chairwoman of the doggone committee that was doing it is on record as having commented about, well, yeah, it's density of Blacks still about the same. I mean, can't help it if a number are in prison. Well, that was by design. That was by design. So you can have the same number of or percentages of diversity, but if those who can vote are compromised or suppressed because they're incarcerated, I would argue that that in itself was just an inappropriate move. But hey, it happened. And why did it happen? Because too few Democrats are elected at our state legislature, and that has to turn around. That has to turn around. But other things that are important, again, those amendments 5 and 6 really should be looked at as being adopted in principle, I dare say, at the local level, as do many other folks. There are some other concerns and priorities that we felt and feel are important. There is a process that can be done before maps are approved that will do a racial voter analysis to make sure that these proposed boundaries are not getting ready to disenfranchise people based on race. Now, again, there's a thin line between making sure that you're not discriminating against someone and then driving your decisions because of them, you see. So there it is, that's a struggle. It's a struggle. There's a fruitful tension there. But the responsibility of the redistricting folk is to make sure that they walk those lines. But our county chose not to do a racial analysis, voter analysis before. And we are suggesting, even in these hearings, that they do them, and they do them now before the final maps are done. And why? Just to see whether or not there is an inadvertent negative impact on any group of voters. There may be a negative impact based on white voters in some of these districts. They may be hurt by the current proposed lines. I don't know. The issue is, do the process to make sure that we're not getting ready to inadvertently negatively impact someone. Because if they wind up doing it, then you are going to be subject to lawsuits. You will be subject to it. So I would dare say, just avoid that and do it now. Do it now. As a matter of fact, if they would just simply run the same monthly demographic report that our supervisor of elections runs now, every month they do it. That's where I got the data, that I quoted to you. If they would simply say, all right, these are the proposed lines, let's run a demographic report on those lines now, to see if things shift. So let's go back to some of the examples I gave. District 4, you may remember I said there's a Republican advantage of only 302 voters. What happens if we ran that demographic report on the new proposed lines for District 3? If that Republican advantage goes from 302 to, let's say, 2,500, this Democrat's having a problem. Okay?
Right.
And the same with District 5. If that 482 Republican voter advantage goes up precipitously, therefore weakening the ability for Democrats to win, that's okay if it's Democrats, because you can mess around on party. But because a fair number of those Democrats happen to be Black, then it might be that that's an adverse impact on the African-American voter, and the law says that you are not to overly impact in a negative way that group's ability to elect candidates of their choosing. Or it may be Latino, or it may be white, or it may be Asian, et cetera. But the fact is, a racial voter analysis can tell you whether or not you're treading on thin ice. So they ought to do it in order to avoid the possibility of disenfranchising someone inadvertently, but still be subject to a suit because you've done it. Or at least it will be alleged that you've done it. And then now our city's going to have to spend major money to defend lines that maybe should never have been drawn at all.
Wow.
And unfortunately, I say it this way, unfortunately, if that comes to pass, the fact that City Council consciously decided not to do it will work to their disadvantage. Because I think any lawyer, first-year law student, is going to ask, well, if you knew that this formula was available to make sure that you weren't getting ready to, however, inadvertently disenfranchise someone, why did you summarily decide not to do it? Okay, that would be my first question, and I'm not a lawyer. Hello.
That's true.
But that's okay. But they are aware of that. There's no way in the world they're not aware of it. And as far as I'm concerned, I believe that they know the voting power shifts that are represented in these maps. And maybe the shift is against Republicans. I don't know. I don't know. That's the point. Let's find out before approval.
Exactly. They're concerned about what happened in that 2020 election.
Exactly. So
because Duval County flipped blue.
Yes. So we are concerned about that process having not been done, and we believe that it should be. If it doesn't happen this round, we absolutely want to begin the work to start the process for getting all of our governing documents changed that will allow for these kinds of modifications as it relates directly to the redistricting process. So those are a few of the concerns. The access to the of the public to the meetings, much more open and transparent we felt it needed to be. Maybe looking at voting age population versus total population and how you divide up the districts in general. Looking at adopting some of the principles of State Amendments 5 and 6 as it pertains to fairer redistricting processes, and imposing up on the data now the racial voter analysis in order to avoid the possibility of lawsuits on the back end, those kinds of things. And then lastly, another concern and a recommendation would be that give strong consideration to perhaps indeed going back to outside structures handling this process, because it can just hopefully eliminate some of the potential politicization of a process that really should not be driven by politics, but rather by a commitment to representative government at its best.
That's good. That is real good. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have been having a candid conversation with Mr. Phillip Minor. I have learned so much. I knew some things, but I have learned so much more. So that goes to show you, regardless how old you are, you're never too old to learn. So to let me know that I'm doing the right things of advocacy for voter, and also to empower me to let me know I can do much more. And if I can learn how to do much more, so can you. I love Mr. Phillip's formula about the 132. So you better make sure you is the one. You need to get 3 more people, and those 3 people need to get 2 more people, and collectively come together to galvanize your family, your community, your church, your work group, your social network, so we can do what we need to do to fully get our district on point to get out of this antiquated, discontinuous phase and get into a continuous phase of change where it benefits everyone. Everyone knows that Democrats are not selfish. We work toward goals and policies to benefit everybody. And to me, it's just still remnants of the consolidation where it's not finished. Even though it's in writing, it's not finished because there's still a lot of things undone. So this why it was so important for me to launch this civic engagement series on the show, because we are talking about courageous conversations. We are having the conversations that so many people talk about, either at their kitchen table, in the barbershop, in the beauty salon, sometime in church, and sometime in work. But in business, with my background, we are always told that is one topic you don't talk about, is politics. But this pandemic has forced us to have the conversation against the rules, because it impacts on how we move, how we work, how we live, how we learn, how we play, how we worship. And if we do not take the reins and be more proactive in using, in the words of Mr. Phillip, the power of your voice, the power of your vote, to make sure these changes happen, we're going to have our children and then their children continually to fight this battle, because we took a laid back approach not to do anything and saying that's not my battle. But ladies and gentlemen, I beg to differ, as well as Mr. Phillip, this is your battle. This is your civil rights 1965 movement right here. So we have learned so much today, and we're going to take a brief commercial break, and we're going to let Mr. Phillip give us our final call to actions before we close out this amazing series. So stay tuned.
You're listening to Courageous Conversations with Teresa W. Gamble and my host, Mr. Phillip Minor. Here are some organizations you can get involved with: the Duval County Democratic Executive Committee, the Duval Women's Information Network, Democratic Women's Club of Florida, Duval County Democratic Hispanic Caucus of Florida, Duval County Asian Pacific Caucus, Duval County Democratic Senior Caucus, and the Duval County Democratic Black Caucus. Get involved to use the power of your vote today. So let's tune back into the conversation with Mr. Phillip Minor on civic engagement responsibility.
Series, and Mr. Phillip is a treasure trove of knowledge, but we have extended our time with him, so we're going to give him this opportunity to give us our final call to action for community and civic engagement, to learning more about your voter profile, and to the redistricting efforts, not just going on in Florida and Jacksonville, Florida, wherever you're listening.
Extra,
you need to get involved with your local government to find out what is going on with
Thank you for listening to Courageous Conversation with Teresa W. Gamble, bridging generational gaps through active listening and action-oriented changes.
Where you vote, how funding is directed from the federal government to the state, to your city, and then to your actual area where you live, work, worship, learn, and play. So make sure you get involved. So I'm going to let Mr. Phillip give us our final call to action, and we're going to close out this amazing series.
Well, let me again simply say how very pleased I am to, one, have had the opportunity to meet you and to learn about your podcast. You are a tremendous woman. Your background is, in my view, equally as impressive as you seem to feel that mine is. But as importantly, and maybe even more importantly, what you're doing with this podcast to extend, to increase the awareness, the knowledge, the education, the opportunity for engagement, and bringing about the change that people so desperately need and richly deserve. I simply have to say hats off to you, my sister, for it. And thank you for allowing me to be a part of it just for these moments that we've been together. But my final thoughts would really be about how I sense the future. And I can certainly say it in 3 words. I am hopeful. I am hopeful. I believe strongly that as I look around, particularly Jacksonville, but other parts of our country, young people are awakening to the reality that they must indeed be even more engaged than they thought they ought to, even more engaged than they thought they wanted to be. And why? Because they do see that change won't happen unless it is a collective effort on the part of those who are thinking about the right way forward to happen. I think that the George Floyd murder was such a catalyst. And across this country, many young people, and particularly young white people, were absolutely incensed, not because, oh, another black man, but because of just how ruthless and heartless and unnecessary it was. And finally, more people were simply saying, enough is enough. Enough is enough. So that awakening of that wonderfully huge segment of our population, young folk, young voters, is happening. And I believe it means that they are prepared to actively chart their future, as opposed to simply try to figure out how to navigate or negotiate the currents and the shifts that others have placed in front of them. They are wanting to take control, and they should. And guess what? We need them to, because all of the great challenges confronting us as a world community must and will be solved by young folks younger even than yourself, and you're not old by a long shot, but all of those are going to be answered by, or must be answered by, that younger generation. And a piece of that is going to be how they vote, for whom they vote, and then what they do in terms of holding those elected officials accountable to, quote unquote, doing the right thing. But I am hopeful, even right here in this county, because we've had the engagement from the young Democrats here in Jacksonville every step of the way of this process that I was describing, in terms of not just the redistricting, but civic engagement in general. The president of the young Jacksonville Young Dems is a member of the Democratic Women's Information Network, and a number of her members are also. But even those who are not members have been particularly engaged and helpful. Her vice president was one of our effective and very excellent note takers in one of our different community meetings. Another one of their staff persons has aided me in my responsibility for chairing the publicity and social media committee. And I'm all thumbs when it comes to a lot of that stuff. But I mean, all I had to do was call and ask, and they dispatched their communications person to assist us with some of the documents we need to do. So it's a collaborative effort. And we, as the Democratic Women's Group and the For Our Future, have committed ourselves to trying to keep information flowing broadly and widely throughout this community. But it really is so exciting to be able to again say, I am hopeful, because of the awakening of that sleeping giant called our young adults, who are absolutely aware of what must be done. And I dare say, my sister, they are prepared to get it done. And I can only say in closing, and I'm prepared to help them in that process.
That is amazing. That's what I'm talking about with Courageous Conversation. It is bridging these generational gaps. And that is the goal of getting this stories told, the impact that you make. I thank you so much for being on my show. You know, sometimes I feel like I don't do enough, but I use and try to leverage my platforms to get the message out, to bring the experts to the table, to the microphone, to educate us, because without education, we are lost. Yes. And we lean more to our own understanding instead of getting the facts. So, Mr. Phillip, I am so humbly honored for your time and your space and the information. And I will be seeing you at the meeting on January the 27th.
Very good. Take care. And again, many thanks to you, and all the best with your continued service through the Courageous Conversations with Teresa W. Gamble. Thank you so much,
Mr. Phillip. Appreciate you. Well, listeners, you have heard it, this amazing civic engagement series. This is the first of many and not the last. Hopefully we can get Mr. Phillip back on and some of the amazing people he worked with his organization, so we can stay informed, because this is an election year for us coming up in 2022, 2023, and 2024. Absolutely. So we do not need to be lazy, ladies and gentlemen. We need to get on the bandwagon and do what we need to do. So we're closing out this amazing series. And Mr. Phillip, I love this quote that you always say, but I don't want to mess it up. It's the one when you talk about governing. So I need you to give me that quote one more time for our listeners, so they can have it in their spirit once they leave this podcast.
Exactly. You can't govern if you don't win. You can't govern if you don't win. If you are challenged by your current city officials or state or federal officials who are governing in ways that are problematic for you, you have to make sure then that your candidate wins, because they can't govern if they don't win.
That is my favorite quote. That is the final word for the day. And thank you all for listening. This is your host, Teresa W. Gamble of Courageous Conversation, keeping it real and live.
Thank you for listening to Courageous Conversation with Teresa W. Gamble, bridging generational gaps through active listening and action-oriented changes.